Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
To all who shall see these presents, greetings. On behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Broadcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Nate Janikin, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, United States Marine Corps, or any other agency of the U.S. government. We will also be recording this webcast for the benefit of those in our community of interest who could not join us today, so we ask that you keep your own webcams off to help us stream smoothly. At the conclusion of our discussion, we will have a question and answer session, so if you have a question, just type it in the group chat, and I'll go through them in the order received. So in 2010, the Department of Veteran Affairs issued a report on suicides amongst veterans. This is the report that produced the 22 in a day statistic that we see around. This report came from data that included only 21 of the 50 states. It also only included 3 of the top 10 most populated at the time, and only 1 of those was even in the top 5. So this statistic is most likely higher. Suicide rates in the United States have been declining since 2018, and an updated version of this report was released in 2022. And it reports 31.7 suicides per 100,000 U.S. veterans, which is still 14 a day. And everyone has struggles, and your struggles will look different than others, but they are still yours. Learning to recognize and cope with these challenges will not make them go away. However, you can learn from them, and instead of reacting in a negative way, you can respond in a positive one. And this is post-traumatic growth, drawing strength and purpose from tragedy and trauma. So this is kind of a little bit of a different episode than what we've done in the past, where we've focused on warfighting or other functions. But this is focused more on taking care of the warfighter, either during, while they are a warfighter, or afterwards. So with me, my guest is Mr. Chris Jackson. He was raised in East Texas, and his Marine Corps career spanned 27 years as a reserve enlisted Marine and an active duty officer. He actively participated in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, multiple tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and in Operation Enduring Freedom. He was privileged to command or serve at the platoon through Marine Expeditionary Force levels. During his military career, Chris has also served with Infantry Training Battalion East, OCS, the Joint Improvised Explosive Device Defeat Organization, and he led operations of the Security Cooperation Education and Training Center, assisting and training partner nation militaries. After retiring, he served as the Chief of Operations at a counter-human trafficking nonprofit organization, facilitating the rescue of 620 victims from modern slavery in the Middle East and Indo-Pacific region. And currently, he is serving as the program director of the Warrior PATHH, for the progressive and alternative training for helping heroes at the Sheepdog Impact Assistance. Sir, so welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd like to see if you had any opening thoughts before we begin.
It really is just to begin the discussion with regard to what it means to go from struggling to struggling well, and understanding what it is, because a lot of us have never been taught that before. And so that really is what the conversation is about today.
Great. So I think that it would be really smart to start with, because the first time I'd ever heard the term post-traumatic growth was in the initial conversations that we had together. So how is that different than post-traumatic stress, and why are we now having, or not now, I'm sure it's a conversation we've had for a while, but why are we having that conversation vice a PTSD conversation?
Sure. Yeah, and great question, by the way. And so, I mean, most people know what post-traumatic stress is, right? Everybody knows what PTSD is. And the thing about post-traumatic growth is the term was coined about 35 years ago by 2 professors in the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, Dr. Richard Tedeschi and Dr. Lawrence Calhoun. And these 2 individuals began to look at basically lessons learned from survivors of the Holocaust, the adults who had come on to late onset disabilities or had lost young children. And they also came upon the information, the studies that had been done on the POWs from the Hanoi Hilton. And so these people had been through a tremendous amount of trauma, but yet they were able to go through and thrive in their life. And so what they did was study, how is it that they went through and did this? And so what you're really seeing is there's a lot of people, I think, who believe out there or are told that PTSD is basically a terminal diagnosis. In other words, once you have PTSD, you've got it from now on. And that's just not the case, right? Once you discover what post-traumatic growth is and what it can do, it really is the other side of the story, right? Is learning, being educated and trained on what it means to go from struggling poorly to being to struggling well, and the practices and everything that goes along with that.
Yeah, one of the things, so one of the books that you had brought up, and have a copy here, you can't see it on the screen since we don't have video, but Struggle Well, so Thriving in Aftermath of Trauma. And they bring up the Hanoi Hilton. They have an intro from Captain Charlie Plum, who was a U.S. Navy fighter pilot in Vietnam and spent 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton. They talk a lot about mental fitness. And being able to you have to start with yourself. One of the things I was thinking of is, because they talk a lot about, training to be able to, find your path. Is there a reason why folks tend to struggle? We come from a very regimented, structured lifestyle when we're active, but then as we go outside the military and we lose that structure, why aren't folks able to keep kind of that same mentality almost?
There's, most likely a lot of different reasons for that. Some of them people get out for a lot of different reasons, whatever that may be. But, really what you're looking at is you lose that structure. There's a grief process, right, that people go through whenever they get out, at varying different levels for everybody that is out there, and it affects people differently. And so depending on, where they are with regard to, going through the grief cycle, what it is that they experienced in the military, whatever it is, can affect how you then begin to take care of yourself. And a lot of it is just not knowing. I know for me, I didn't understand what that was when I retired and what was going to happen. And probably 2 to 3 weeks after, getting moved into where our final location was, I really found it hard to start getting out of bed. And I didn't understand why. I didn't know why, what the deal was there and why I was going through this. And it wasn't until I began to work on myself to, was privileged to be able to get in and start doing this work, and I began to really understand the depth of what all of it is and how we actually need to be retrained, right? And how to deal with these things that we're going to experience when we get out.
Yeah, I think they had a great example in the book. They called it a reactive sine wave. And they show a really nice sine wave that's staying within the boundaries. But the way they equated it in the book was more of like lanes in a road. Like we have rules, for driving. You can change lanes when you need to, but you have to signal while you do it, or you're supposed to signal when you do it. But you want to maintain the vehicle inside those lanes, but you tend to steer outside of those lanes. So, above that sine wave, that, anger was one of those elements, and then below was depression. So it's really finding the tools to kind of keep you within those sine waves.
Right. Yeah. So, essentially what you're talking about is you have, when you get out, there's things that we learn while we're in. And it is everything from, you mentioned anger, right? Is that, hey, this is how things get done, is you get angry about something and make sure that people will get that done, or you become completely numb, right? Or the depression. Basically, there's that no emotion aspect to it. And it's figuring out and getting the practices in place to be able to bring yourself back into those boundaries and bring yourself back into the present. Because when you're dealing with both anger and numbness, a lot of times you're dealing with things that you're either afraid of in the future, or you're basically referring back to the past as something that happened during that time. So.
And then Warrior PATHH. So one of the things that we had talked about was, the difference between, preventative measures and intervention methods. And me and my helicopter aviation, we do preventative maintenance in order to make sure that the aircraft doesn't break. But then if it does break, we have to do maintenance afterwards.
Right.
So that's kind of my idea. So Warrior PATHH, what exactly is that?
Yeah, so Warrior Path is the intervention side of post-traumatic growth, and that's where somebody is already in that, whatever their level of maybe crisis mode might be the way to put it. They come to it, and we work through all these things using basically the knowledge and the training and the practices of post-traumatic growth in order to help them work through that and realize that they can learn from those things that have happened to them in life, be able to put those lessons in place and grow from it, and then from there thrive. So that in a quick nutshell is what Warrior Path is, being more the intervention side.
So how would a person know if they needed to lean more towards the intervention side or the preventative side?
That's going to be individually dependent, right, on what's going on there. What I would tell you is that I think everybody could use the preventative side of it, right? When you begin to look at, on active duty, those who are actively serving, the stresses that they go through and how this is accumulated, it's important to understand that stress, right, accumulates, and so does trauma accumulates, and everybody reacts or responds differently to it. You can have two people who are in the exact same situation, and both of them are going to be affected differently from that. One of them may come out of it with just a little bit of stress or nothing at all. Another person may come out of it be traumatized by it, right? And there's nothing they can do about that, because it is a natural process that they go through as those events happen, right? It's all part of a lot of it deals with the autonomic nervous system and how it goes through. And when as these things accumulate, it actually goes into and is stored in your body, not just in your mind. So that's part of the reason why we go through and we talk about practices, whether it's a breathing technique or whatever it is, in order to begin to address not just what is going on mentally, but what is going on physically with somebody, right? As that stuff begins to accumulate, because, it can be everything from decision fatigue. When we start talking about trauma and stress and those kind of things, the gamut from going just decision fatigue is like always having to make decisions on, as a leader and those kind of things, to chronic stress and fatigue. And then, hopefully not ever getting there, but is then, someone taking their life by suicide. So there's a lot of different components with regard to this, and why, I believe that bringing this discussion in this form is a good thing, because as stress begins to accumulate, why we don't always recognize that is what is going on with us, and why, maybe it is that we develop, stomach aches or irritable, IBS or whatever it is, or just other things, because there's an incredible book out there called The Body Keeps a Score, which explains a lot of this. But the reality is that until we have healthy ways in order to release the stress, right? Not just release it, but actually delete it out of our system and out of our body, it's going to continue to accumulate. And at some point, your body is going to say enough, and something's going to happen, right? And, and I'll use a personal example, a prime example of something that just happened, not necessarily to me, but it happened recently. And that was several months ago. I actually retired my best friend. 30 years of service, multiple deployments, a lot going on, a lot of responsibility. And, retiring, things are looking good, but he was also dealing with, just things in life. His father had an illness, and he'd had it for 5 years. And this illness that he had affected his lungs, and essentially it suffocated him to death over the course of 5 years. Very stressful things going on. Well, about a month after he retired, his father passed away, and everything that goes along with that. About a week after that, I'm actually at a Warrior PATHH course, about halfway through, and my wife gives me a call and says, "Hey, your best friend just had a stroke." And so essentially his wife had woken up in the middle of the night to him actually in a seizure on the side of the bed, and ended up, the stroke. He was in a seizure for an hour, flown to the hospital, but it was bad. And it was to the point to where I had got on a plane, went there to see what was happening and to do what I could. And I arrived about 2 hours before they had to take him off life support, right? And so what had happened, right, is that he had built up so much stress, and despite us being trying to talk about it and to get him to put things in place and to understand these things, not doing that, his body accumulated the stress, and that's how his body decided to release that stress. It ended up basically destroying, part of the vein in his neck and his brainstem and the other things. And so, the body will keep the score of what's going on until we find a way, and we're able to do this right on a regular basis. Another kind of quick story is, and he's one of my guides, right? One of the instructors at the course that I have. He was law enforcement, actually military and law enforcement for about 30 years. 2 weeks after he retired, he's laying in bed and his neck breaks in 2 places, lies asleep, and then his knees are shot. And so his body was finding a way to finally let go of what was happening and said, okay, I could do this now and release that stress. And so that's why I think that we have got to have a serious discussion about what can we put in place, right, in order to help those who are actively serving to be able to alleviate this stress and to have the knowledge and those kind of things as they go through their career or their time of service. And so that's really kind of the ultimate objective when, in the discussion and where we're going and what we'd like to talk about.
Yeah, I think one of the ways I've seen that described as well is, if you've ever heard the phrase, I don't have the spoons for that. Essentially, it's the idea that I can only handle so much at one time. I can only carry so much water with so many spoons before my hands are full. So if I don't have the spoons for additional things, then I can't take those on. Or if I take it on, I'm going to drop other spoons. I think, an example from the book is the rucksack. So as things get added to me, whatever stressors, whether it's good stress, bad stress, those are additional things added to my pack. But eventually at some point, I've got to stop, unload my pack and reload my pack so I can distribute the weight better, or just straight up remove rocks or gear from my pack and drop them off on the side of the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's really what what it is that we're talking about, because at some point, and we do, we use that analogy in our course also, is just at some point you just keep putting stuff in that pack. You can sew it up, you can duct tape it, you continue to do these things. It's big rocks, small rocks, whatever it is, and usually it's going to be some small rock that you put in there and everything just explodes, right? And that's where you lose it, right? Whatever that means for you or whatever it is that happens, typically on somebody who didn't really do anything, it just happens to be that last little bit, right, that sets you over the edge with regard to those things. So, just another reason to look at why these this knowledge and practices would be beneficial, applying it into what the education system, the training system, and really become part of the daily life of Marines and sailors that we have.
Yeah, I think from an active duty standpoint, I think there's also an element of machismo almost, of I'm going to continue to do what I have to do because that's like, there are folks on my left and right that are requiring, I think, to bring it back to pilots again, because that's what we do. The idea of going to the flight dock was something I never, ever wanted to do, because I knew that the first thing the flight dock was going to do was going to down me. And all I wanted to do was fly. So, you have folks that stay hurt, whether it be mental injuries or physical injuries, and continue to fly because they need to, whether it's safe to do so or not, because there are folks, that they perceive on the left and right that need them to continue to do that. Really, they don't. So how do we get that message out to folks that it's okay to get help? Because looking back on the early days of PTSD, I feel like that was a lot of the issue was folks weren't willing to ask for help because it was seen as weakness. How do we get past that?
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about the stigma aspect and what that means. And that's one of the reasons why I think really beginning to talk about this in the aspect of mental fitness, right? You brought that up at the very beginning, is because so when you look at what we do for physical fitness, right? Physical fitness is an integrated part of everything that we do. We train people up, in their initial training. They're expected to work out on a regular basis. Due to unit PT, we have PFTs, we have CFTs, all these things to ensure that Marines and sailors are physically fit in order to be able to go do the jobs that we need them to do, right? But when we begin to talk about mental fitness, right, there, at least what I've seen, there's nothing there. And there's potentially multiple reasons that this exists, but why wouldn't we think that you have to work out yourself in a mental way as well as you do in a physical way, right? So being physically fit or mentally fit is different than just having the knowledge and the training on all those aspects with regard to what you learn in order to do the operations you need to do. Mental fitness is about building the strength and capacity of you mentally and then also physically to be able to deal with the stresses that you're going to deal with in the professional arms. Okay. So, part of this is there's, I think, this underlying assumption that occurs that because somebody's gone through initial training, right, whether it's boot camp, OCS, whatever it is, they are then mentally capable, right, have both the strength and capacity from a mental standpoint to deal with all the stress and the rigors that's going to be asked of them during their time of service. And that's just, I don't think, reality, right? You've gone through some stressful things and what those are, but have you been taught how to deal with the stress in a long and enduring point, right? And also like these spikes, whatever it may be, with that, potentially traumatic things that occur with you during your time of service. And so we don't do that. And so going through and looking at how we begin to talk about this from a mental fitness aspect, right? And it's because what we're talking about, and when you look at, Struggle Well and Warrior PATHH, it is all about self-care, right? The ability to take care of myself, to put in, to use that knowledge and education that I have through practices and other things to build that strength and capacity that we're talking about, and to have the self-awareness, right, to know when I need to do that and when I need to use these, and to putting those things in place so it's part of my routine that I'm growing just like I would physically, right? I can't expect to go lift, bench 300 pounds at the gym if I only go in once a month, right? It's something I have to go lift on a daily basis. And so why wouldn't I think that in order to expand our mental strength and capacity, we would need to be doing something on a daily basis also, right? So, and the interesting thing is when you begin to look at, what, potentially what this looks like, or even within the Marine Corps orders, the framework and the thought process for this actually already exists. When you look at Marine Corps Order 1720.2 Alpha, it actually says this. Let's see. So basically, create a command or foster a command climate that supports and promotes mental, physical, spiritual, and social fitness, right? And so basically teaching healthy stress reactions, cultivating mental, physical, spiritual, and social fitness as a cultural norm, right? In other words, how do we go through and make mental fitness a cultural norm? Well, we have to put the emphasis on it to the point to where it becomes as ingrained in, our warrior culture as something like physical fitness or professional military education. It all has to be part of that, because, what has been occurring up to this point, when you begin to look at, say, suicide prevention, those kind of things, how well is it working for us right now? Right? Is it, can you really, there are a lot of great things that were put in place, right, that were needed to be put in place, but it's now, I think, time to have that next level of discussion to open up the aperture a little bit to where do we take it from here So that what we're actually allowing people to do is to get rid of that stress on their own, right? Understanding and having the awareness of when they need to do that, so that they never actually get to, or hopefully ever get to that point of crisis where intervention is needed. So that is, I think, the ultimate objective and goal with regard to when we're talking about it, because when it's integrated into the entire training continuum, instead of, oh, I've got to go see, the therapist today, that's when the stigma begins to go away, right? Because it's not, there's no stigma attached to being a warrior, to training a warrior, because the practices and things that we're looking at are things that warriors have done throughout history. Right? These are not new things. It's just a rediscovery of them, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, I think when I got to that section in the book where it talks about, you have to make sure that you are good before you can make sure that other folks are good. They talk about, that the hike to the top of Mount Struggle.
Mm-hmm.
The real key is coming back down and helping the others along the way. But going back to what you were saying about, you got to be able to take care of yourself. The thing that popped into my head was that's almost the antithesis of the things that we were taught in terms of like shipmate self or
Mm-hmm.
weapon gear self. Self was always last
Mm-hmm.
in all of those items. So I think there's an element of like, we have to kind of get out of that mindset a little bit, that there are times where, that weapon is you.
Mm-hmm.
They have to make that change. I did get
Absolutely.
one question
Okay.
from Ian.
Okay.
He said, veterans who've retired from active duty have a tendency to downplay new stressors from civilian life because they think the stakes aren't as high or something to that effect. If that's the case, how can veterans best process these new stressors? And are there any post-retirement stressors that you've commonly encountered that can contribute to the dangerous buildup that you've described?
Good question. It is different. So what I would say, and this is right, my own experience is when I retired, it took me probably 6 years to feel comfortable back in the civilian world again. And it's everything from things moving at a different pace, lines of authority at jobs are not as straight lined, for lack of a better way of putting it. I mean, you may have 3 or 4 bosses that you're dealing with out there instead of, just one chain of command, if you will. There is, just a lot of shifts that you don't anticipate. And, those are taking on differently by everybody, right? Depending on what their situation is. So, in dealing with those, and some of it is, am I able to get a job? I mean, I actually, kind of a personal experience of this when I was looking at employment. I actually, and I didn't find this out till years later, that I wasn't accepted into a job or I wasn't interviewed because there was the thought process, because I was a veteran, that I had PTSD and that they didn't want to deal with that within this company. Right. So there's those kind of underlying things, I think, that exist out there. I'm not sure that answers Ian's question or not. But.
Well, I think the big thing is everybody's struggle is different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that understanding that, yes, the struggles or the stressors that you have now are different than the stressors that you had before.
Right.
Once you retire, I'm no longer flying on goggles at night. So that stressor is gone, but I have a different stressor. And we kind of talked about it in the beginning where, you can have 2 people in the same incident that will respond to it very differently, because they have a different amount of spoons in their hand, or their rucksack is filled differently, or they have different training to be able to deal with, whatever that stressor is. So I think that would be the big piece is, understanding that just because it seems like it's not as high stakes as it was, doesn't mean that it's not an important stress for you to deal with.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the stress could be just, how is it that I continue doing what this job is? How do I deal with just the change and the shift in environment or culture that is there? I mean, that in and of itself is a lot of stress. How am I going to be able to continue to to feed my family the way or live, you know, the way we expect to hopefully be able to live and those kind of things. So yeah, the stresses a lot of times are different, but the interesting thing about stress is if you're stressed out about something, the weight of it, you know, whether is no different depending on how long you hold it, right? Because the longer you hold any stress, whatever it is just as debilitating as, you know, something that's heavy that you only carry for a short time.
One of the questions we got from Albert, he said, how have improvements in medical understanding of some of these stressors changed or evolved the care or support from a campaign like this? He specifically brings up a New York Times story that came out over the weekend, which I saw the headline for, but didn't get a chance to read. But basically, artillery Marines in Iraq and Syria suffering from TBI, you know, just from being on the gun line, basically.
Right. So, I mean, there are discoveries being made all the time, and this is actually, I mean, just some of these discoveries is the what I was referring to earlier, where understanding that, you know, when you're talking about somebody's mental health, that it or like PTSD, that it's not just about what's going on in your head. It's also about the things that are affecting your body, because the things going on in your mind are down through the vagus nerve and into your system, right? Because it's not just telling your system what to do, but it's telling it how to do it, right? Raising your heart rate, whatever it is. So there's effects that go through there. But I actually have read that article, and yeah, just the effects of the TBI and what that amount of rounds being around that type of concussion stuff. Are we learning every day from it? Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's medical centers out there devoted to TBI that are looking at this kind of thing on a regular basis. The big thing is, you know, if that's what the issue is to get them in, have them seen, you know, and being willing to maybe let them go out into town to one of these, you know, medical centers that is specifically dedicated towards just the study of TBI. One of those would be like the Marcus Brain Institute in Colorado, right? There's a lot of them out there, but they're really, in a lot of ways, leading the effort with regard to how we deal with TBI, ways to go through and to mitigate some of those things that those Marines may be going through.
And I think to take it away from a military look too, I think we're seeing the same thing with the NFL and the NHL in terms of TBIs and CTE and how those effects of constant blows to the head can affect folks well after they're done with, you know, whatever their career happens to be.
Oh yeah, it's a lifelong effect that happens, right? So a lot of it gets into basically how do you mitigate the damage that has been done and that damage continuing to occur.
Right. So for a program like Warrior PATHH, how would a person like get into a program like yours?
So, I mean, there's several different websites out there that they can go through, and they can actually put in an application for it to be able to go through those. And, you know, that's really the simplest way to do it. You can go in and you can Google Warrior PATHH. It's two H's, but that is just the easiest way to go through it and find out what that is. There's basically a short application in there. They ask for DD-214 or what's basically proof of service that is in there, but that's how they go through and do that. So we had somebody ask, you know, what are the ancient warrior practices? So, I mean, there's a lot of them, not to go too far into it. I mean, some of them are going to be familiar with people, right? Everything from breathing, right? There are different types of breathing that you can do for different types of situations. You know, one of them that we like and teach is called a 4-7-8. And basically what that means is you inhale for 4 seconds or a 4-second count. You hold it for a 7-second count, and you release it for 8 seconds. It does a couple of things. One is so as you inhale, it raises your heart rate. Then you hold for a count of 7. That allows for a longer oxygen exchange. And then you exhale for count of 8, right? So doubling the amount of time that you exhale, which does two things. One is that allows your heart rate to drop for an additional 4 seconds, because as you exhale, your heart rate drops. But what it also does is by having your exhale longer than your inhale, it begins to activate what's known as the relaxation response. And it's one of the only ways that we can go through to do this. That's one of the things. But it can, the other, practices that may be out there, it's everything from, maybe some type of journaling of what that looks like. One of the big ones we see is just different ways in order to release stress. The labyrinth is one of the big ones that we do. I don't want to give too much away about that, but it was one of the big places that it was used with ancient Greeks, but we find them all over the world. There are ones, Native Americans in Arizona to ones that the Vikings walked in Crete. And you also see them in cathedrals, right, in Europe and those kind of places. But when you know and understand how to walk a labyrinth correctly, what you can release there, understanding that when you walk one, it's not the same as a maze. Maze is a puzzle, has multiple entrances, exits. A labyrinth has one entrance, one exit, same thing. It's about the journey inward and slowing yourself down to get to the center and then coming back out again. And so that's some of the warrior practices. And it's also looking at, what is it like to actually stop, walk in nature and take appreciation for it. That's one of the practices that is out there. So we actually teach 31 within PATHH. It's similar in the Stover Well program. And it's not that we expect anybody to do, right, all 31. The whole intent is for you to find the ones that work for you. And, it's not even that you have to do the ones that we necessarily teach, but find something that works, right? Meditation is one of them. Warriors have been doing meditations throughout history. There's a lot of different ways to do that and what it looks like. So those are just a few examples of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that the different techniques piece, when you're teaching somebody to be an instructor, I might have a very specific way that I do things, but if I have to teach somebody a technical skill, depending on the way that you learn, the way that I do it might not work for you. And I don't need to know every technique on doing that thing. But if I can say, hey, I know so-and-so does this technique this way, and that might work for you. That's usually what I tried to teach instructors was, know your way very well, but know other people's way too, so that when you see a student struggling, and that's kind of the thing that came to my mind when it was like, yeah, we've got all these techniques, but you can't know all of them. They can't all work for you because everybody is different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it, right? It's about choice because, one of the things when you begin to look at people who have gone through traumatic situations or, may still be in that fight or flight mode, one of the biggest things for them is to have a choice, right? Because they most likely didn't have a choice about the traumatic situation or the stress it is that they're going through. And so having the choice of like, okay, that didn't work for me, but this does, hey, that's fantastic. I don't care. Just do something that is relieving stress with regard to your system. And there's actually some study out there that shows when you go through and you activate the relaxation response, right? And it can be done a lot of different ways. If you just do that for 20 minutes a day and activate that response, it actually will add longevity to your life, because that is a way for you to go through and release that stress and other things. I won't go too far down the whole thing about how it grows telomeres on the end of your DNA and those kind of things. But yeah, it's pretty phenomenal, particularly because it's that simple.
So when we talk about breathing techniques and meditation, I know there's a lot of folks out there that are skeptical about those types of techniques,
right?
Because it doesn't work for them, so it can't work for anybody else.
Right.
Do you have a lot of skeptics based on the program, and how do you deal with people like that?
Absolutely. I mean, one of them is we let them know, first and foremost, it's a warrior practice. If you look across multiple different warrior cultures, if you will, they all had some type of meditation that they did, whatever that may be. Whether it was a breathing meditation, a mantra meditation, whatever it is. And so really it's just getting about, are you open to learning this and at least giving it a shot, trying it out? And what we find is that a lot of times when you get to somebody at that point, and they're open-minded about it, that they actually discover that this really works, right? That things happen. And part of it is understanding that, there are some things that take a little bit of time in order to be able to see the benefit of it. I know for me, meditation, one of the biggest things, it's not the actual experience in the meditation, because you actually don't have to be relaxed in meditation for it to work. A lot of people think that you have to be, but it's the grace afterwards, my ability to respond to things versus reacting to things afterwards that I've gone through that and done that.
So we have a question in the chat here. It says, so the younger generation of Marines have grown up with a larger emphasis on mental health. Do you foresee challenges for them with older Marines who have been conditioned to see getting help for mental health as weak? And if these younger Marines try to implement self-care practices for themselves and their Marines?
Yes, certainly there's an aspect to that, right? And that's why having education and training across the board at all levels and letting them begin to experience it, I think would help to mitigate that. There's no doubt you're going to see some of that, but does that mean we shouldn't do it, right? Because I know that I've had people who have actually gone through the course who were skeptical. We had one particular student after she left was like, I'm skeptical about this, and didn't do any of the practices, right? You have to do the practice, you have to put the work in order for it to work. Well, her kids were like, hey, didn't you just go to this course in order to help with all this stuff? And they finally talked to her enough. She's like, fine, I'm going to go do this just to prove you wrong. And all of a sudden it worked. And now her life is completely different because she went through and did that. So, it really just depends. I don't know if that helps to explain or not.
I think it does. I think this goes to a different conversation that I've had with people about just connecting with younger Marines in general.
Right.
I equate it a lot to, my generation and older grew up in a world where we didn't have the internet. So our focus on, YouTube and TikTok and all these kinds of things, like our attitude towards the internet and technology in general is very different than folks who grew up with a smartphone in their hand, basically, and have been doing this stuff their whole life. Right. It's kind of a different attitude. I think, to Nick's question about, the mental health aspect of it, and teaching a younger generation that mental health is important. I think for the older Marines, there's a level of empathy that they lack if they don't have an understanding of what those Marines are going through. And in order to be a better leader, they need to be have more empathy for those Marines. Because I think there's a level of, your unit will be better if everybody is taken care of. And we've got a lot of, not just mental health, but we've got a lot of programs across the Marine Corps that are aimed at making the individual Marine better. And I think people are mistaking that with individuality, and they lack an understanding that taking care of the individual Marine means that your unit as a whole is going to be better, because that individual Marine is going to have less issues and they have more time with the unit.
Yeah, right. So, and when you look at, so there's a study out there that shows, and this was for the Army, but with any of these kind of studies, it can kind of be looked at across the board as being the same in each one of the services. Studying the Army, that you had 74% of the people joining self-identified with at least one traumatic experience in their life, right? You had 60% who had two or more. So what we have to realize is that we have essentially 3/4 of what is coming into the military already has at least one traumatic experience that they got coming in. And so, what is it that we're doing to set the baseline and to look at all this? As we begin to look at this, and kind of to your point, and you begin to, I think, allude to it, is when you put things like this in place, what you're really creating is the ability for people to stay in longer, right? So you're talking about you got less first term attrition. You're going to have people that are mentally more fit to be able to do what it is, which means that they can serve longer, potentially. And so it benefits the entire organization to be able to go through and do this, and to have this basically really a changing culture and attitude with regard to what mental fitness is and how we go through and tackle it, which is really, I think, where we need to get to, because you will see that shift, because I think they're correct. You've got people coming in who are much more aware of what mental health and mental wellness are, and are willing to look at those maybe at greater depth than people who have come in previously.
Yeah, I think the big thing would be is hopefully those individuals can, I don't want to say gut it out because that sounds bad, but hopefully they can, we put in some programs that allow those people to stay so that they become the senior leadership.
Right.
So then that empathy exists, a better understanding of how it is. I think we slowly, we saw that with PTSD. 2003, 2004, you had PTSD, like you were done.
Right.
And now it's a much different attitude than what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. But I think some of it would also be just grassroots, because it's how the programs that we're talking about right now grew, right? It was all a grassroots effort. When I see my buddy who I know was struggling, right, who was dealing with a lot of stress, and all of a sudden he's coming back and he's a different person, I'm going, okay, well, what just happened? And the only thing that I can say is, okay, well, he received this training and is doing these practices. I now want some of that. So I think you will begin to see those things. And it could be something as simple as, maybe there's less people going in to see the first sergeant. Maybe there's less people going in to do different things, and leadership is potentially not seeing the issues that they were having to deal with before, because they're being taken care of at a lower level. There's always going to be people, right, who need the therapist, or to go see the chaplain, or those things. But if we can lessen that, because we've taught people how to take care of themselves, right, and to be able to get rid of those stress, and to be able to and continue to grow their strength and capacity, how much better of an organization are we going to be? Because what you're talking about then is, people who are making more sound decisions. They're more focused about what it is they're doing, because when you're in that fight or flight mode, which people can be in that for years, right? If they're not dealing with all this stuff, when you're in that fight or flight mode, you actually become tunnel vision. It's harder to have focus, because you're always in a threat mode, and everything is catching your attention. You're not able to look at that. So what kind of decisions are people making when they're in that type of mindset also? So.
We did have one question here in the room with us.
Yes, one of the things about optimizing human performance, I'll go back to recruit training. Coming into a service, that's an incredibly stressful period. And then I remember you talked a little bit earlier about how these things are already part of our culture. And I remember going to the chapel. I wasn't a guy that went to church, but I tell you, when I went to the chapel and I swung my dog tags around, saying I'll fly away, it was an incredible release for me to take on the next week. And then I look forward to going to the chapel the following week. So I say all that to say, as I got up in the Marine Corps leadership realm, one of the things that I saw was a lot of leaders didn't know how to be vulnerable so that they can showcase how to be resilient. We went from a zero defect mentality back when I came in the early 90s to now it's okay to say, hey, I used to make mistakes, and this is what I did from the mistake. So from a stress or struggling well point, what are some of the examples, or do you think it is a critical leadership skill to have the ability to showcase vulnerability to a certain degree as a leader, would that make you a better leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think in certain cases it would, right? Being able to say that you're struggling with something, right? And you have to look at like whatever the group is that you're doing it in the context.
Right.
So, you know, to necessarily as depending on what your rank is as a leader, then going and talk to maybe a junior group, that might not be the best case to do it. But I think people have got to find a way to be able to do that within the right context and within the right groups. You know, because I know, you know, for us, that's one of the big things within our courses and with any of the courses, that we don't ask the people who are there to do anything that we haven't done or won't do right in front of them. Mm-hmm. And so we're very vulnerable about our story now, but you're also in a very safe environment to be able to do that. But it's critical to be able to do that at times. So, you know, having the correct environment and whatever that is, I think would be beneficial. But yeah, I think because now you're more self-aware. Right. With what it is that you're doing. And you actually brought up resiliency, and I wanted to kind of make a quick point about this. So when we're talking about post-traumatic growth, right, it's different than being resilient. Resiliency is a fantastic thing, but post-traumatic growth is transformational. And so here's kind of what I mean by that is if you take the analogy of a boxer, right, the ability for somebody to take a punch and get back up, that's resilience, right? Post-traumatic growth is then what I'm now doing is taking that boxer and showing them how to bob and to weave and to get stronger and to do those things so that next time the punch isn't a direct shot on the jaw. Maybe it's a glancing or whatever it is, or they're able to completely get out of the way. So that's hopefully that kind of
that kind of
a little bit clearer. Yeah,
everything's connected. Right. Intersectionality. Yeah. So, but thank you.
Yeah, I wrote down the exposure versus disclosure. So that element you talked about, you know, everything that we do in your program, you do it first because that's disclosure. So the things that you've shared with us here, if we didn't ask you to share that, you were able to disclose it yourself. You know, but if you put someone on the spot, that's exposure, and that's kind of a negative way to do it because you're sort of forcing that person to answer a question that they might not be ready to answer almost.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely have to be in the right place with regard to your growth to be able to do, like to have those kind of discussions, putting us all. And if you look at trauma, right, if you're asking somebody to talk about their trauma and they're not there yet, what you're doing is re-traumatizing them. Plain and simple. I mean, and people can be traumatized by single words. They can be like re-traumatized by a smell, by a location. And this is all stuff that is being learned and understood. And it's amazing because when you begin to understand some of this, when you know somebody is going through something, and you're kind of looking at them going, well, why did they just do that? And you begin to ask the right questions and maybe know what it is that they're going through, it begins to make sense, right? So
we're coming up on the end of our hour. The last question I do have is, you know, we've talked about a lot of stuff working with veterans, folks who are out already, but we've also mentioned, hey, we need to make sure that we institute programs and techniques and ways to help those who are active now. Are Warrior PATHH or other organizations like Warrior PATHH doing things with the active force to help them improve their programs?
Yes. So, I mean, there are organizations out there, and one of the programs actually is Struggle Well, where we are trying to help active duty. I mean, that is one of the reasons I think for this discussion is, okay, how do we go through? I've seen this work. I have been out for about 10 years now. I've worked with veterans in some form or fashion, you know, specifically with regard to this for over 3 years now. And I keep seeing the same stuff, right? The same things that are out there. So what can we put in place to not only help people during their time of service to help create, longer first term retention or just retention in general, to, the longevity of somebody's service, where they're able to do that to, when they get out, that they can actually have a great life, one where they're struggling well and not struggling, because there's a lot of veterans out there who are struggling hard. And it, when you begin to look at it, whatever the numbers are with regard to those actively serving who've taken their own life, when you look at that over the course of a year, right, 365 days out in the civilian world with regard to veterans, that's happening. That same number is happening within usually about 17 or less days, right? So knowing and understanding that we've lost veterans to taking their own life at 3 times the amount of what we lost in both Iraq and Afghanistan, right? We're over 30,000 now. So this is not just about helping them during their time of service, because they're going to be able to take all that knowledge with them, right, when they leave, and continue those practices and the knowledge. And what we know is that somebody who's been through this training, the courses, they have the ability to, or they do positively affect up to 500 people within their sphere of influence. So think about what that means, with regard to pushing this out, and also taking care of the people who have already served our country and protected us.
Yeah, I think I've always had a firm belief that, we take a lot of 17, 18-year-old kids, we bring them into the military, we train them to be war fighters, and then we sort of, when they get out, they're just out. Maybe they go to TAPS or whatever it was called when they got out. But I firmly believe that while they're in, we should make them better citizens, so that when they get out, we hopefully put back into society something better than what we took in almost. So we have a few more minutes left, sir. I did want to give you the opportunity to make any closing comments.
I think really the biggest thing is just continuing the discussion and what it is that we really mean by mental fitness, right? How can we go through and improve that and begin to put the things in place that become as ingrained within, the Marine Corps as something like physical fitness, and PME, whatever it may be, in order to allow people to grow and to thrive and to do those things, so that we're seeing less people taking their lives. We're seeing less people with this, essentially catastrophic stress whenever they get out, whatever it is that happens. So that's the hope, and we really like to see things go, I think.
So, sir, thank you very much for taking the time to come down and talk with us today. I enjoyed the conversation and your insight. Thank you to all the folks who have joined us today in the chat and here in the Krulak Center as well. That's all we have for this episode, so go ahead and carry out the plan of the day.
Remember, your struggle is unique to you, but you are not alone. In the episode show notes, you'll find suggestions for books, videos, and websites to give you a place to start or continue, depending on where you are in your journey. Asking for help is not a weakness, and this is not a battle you have to fight yourself. Thanks for joining us. As always, we depend on support and feedback from the Team Krulak community to constantly improve our offerings and reach a wider audience. So if you have feedback on this episode, please take a moment to fill out the survey linked in the show notes to help us do better. Also, if you have enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. It truly does help us reach a wider audience. Thank you as always for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.